Here we are with a little demo here, and this is just to share some ideas about compositing and the issues that you might come across. So we have what's known as an A over B compositing scene here, and this is one of the simplest things that you would have. I'm taking this example from the files from a great book called Adobe After Effects CC, Visual Effects and Compositing by Mark Christiansen. So I hope that's okay. I've been using this book in my classes and it does quite well. But what we have here is some footage, and if I zoom in here, or in, there we go. There's a composited element here, and that's this, for some reason, Cosa beer can that's been put on. Now this is actually a 3D rendered element, and it's been rendered with a with an alpha channel and popped in here. So if I do a little bit of a preview over here, it's going to go through and try and render these frames. This is the composite element over the footage. Now what you may notice is that there's some camera movement here. We can see it moving around, and the footage has been tracked. We aren't really dealing with the tracking so much. This is all about issues with compositing. But I just kind of want to show you here that if we see here this null object actually has the tracking applied to it. So if I kind of play here, we can see the movement that happens there, and that tracking data is there on the null object. And then the items that have been added, in this case we have this rendered beer can and this adjustment layer which has a shadow on it. They're parented to that null object, and that's where they're getting their tracking data. So anyway, that's what we have going there. But I want to talk about issues with tracking, not tracking, compositing primarily here, because the whole point is to have your composited element, whether it's real or fantastic, to look like it fits within the scene and blends nicely and is part of the scene. So what you're going to want to do there is zoom in really tight, even say something like this. I'm going to see if I can give myself a little bit more room here to look around. And what we see here is that the as we kind of go through here, the footage, no matter what footage it is, has animated noise, and you can see that happening right in here. And I can also see that kind of added to the this composited element. So let's open up this beer can here and look and see, oh, it's got effects. If I open those up, we have levels and we have add grain. So with the levels, you can see if I turn this off, we'll zoom out a bit here. If I turn the levels off, there's the original. And that's been rendered in a way that's fine. It's fairly neutral, and you see there's no real color cast to it. So the levels are making it darker to fit in with the scene, and they're also adjusting the sort of a color cast and giving it a sort of blue color cast as well. So that's fine. And if we look at the add grain bit here, we can see that there is definitely some grain that has been added, and you can see there's sort of animating grain that goes along. But really what you're looking for is you're wanting to match whatever the grain is, grain or noise in the footage, to match that so that it's working here. And I don't think that's really quite happening. But with any time you have a rendered element, CG or 2D, that you're compositing in here, there are two things that you're going to need to be aware of as a compositing artist that the computer graphics are not going to have. The first is they're not going to have grain in and of themselves, and the other thing is that they're also going to lack a bit of softness. So as I look at this right here, I'm just kind of comparing the quality of the pixels in the original footage look at the pixels right here. There's been no blurriness added here. And so in almost all cases when you have some type of CG element, what you need to do is you need to add grain or noise, and you need to blur it a little bit to match up with the footage. Now you're not trying to make it noisy or trying to make it blurred, but you're trying to make it match the footage, whatever that needs to be. And so we can see these elements here are in focus, but as you zoom in, look at them, and kind of see individual pixels, you'll see the softness there. We're also trying to match the overall color and the amount of contrast happening here. And so there are a few things I think that are a problem currently as it sits here. So we definitely do on this layer need to add some blurriness. So easy enough to do in After Effects. Go up to Effect, and we have our blur and sharpen. There are various blurs that you can use. Camera lens blur is a good one, often good for blurring out backgrounds and trying to do some depth of field stuff. And of course we have very simple Gaussian blur and others that you can use. Probably camera lens blur or Gaussian blur might be the ones that are the most useful in this case. So I'll just do a little Gaussian blur here, and that's going to add to the effects on this layer. And you can see there we go, the Gaussian blur. It starts off being 0, so I'm going to crank that up a bit until I see something happening. And I actually need to go up quite a bit. There we go. Here's my 7.9, maybe we can go to 9 here. It seems like it's kind of much less powerful than, say, in Photoshop, so you need higher values here. So as I'm looking at the softness here, I'll zoom in a bit more. There we go. Because this is really how you want to see things this close to see how it's compositing in. As I'm looking at the softness here, that's looking a lot better. So compare things like edges and details here to say this cube of chalk right there. We want that to kind of match up. Now let me take this Gaussian blur off, and once again you can see a difference. That just does not look like it fits in the scene, whereas that looks a lot better. So that's something that we definitely are wanting there as well. Something I want you to note is that look at the added grain here. So as I play this, and we go through some frames here, you can see that the grain is actually getting blurred as well. See that? Now that's not a problem, because look at how the grain looks right here. Look at how the grain looks right here. I was thinking if I just take this Gaussian blur off, you can see that grain that was looking a little bit too sharp, a little bit too crunchy. And so the fact that I'm adding a Gaussian blur afterwards is blurring not only the item on this layer, it's also blurring the grain. Now just as a comparison, if I were to take this Gaussian blur, you can see it's the third effect. If I grab it and I put it up here between the two, what's going to happen is I'm going to be blurring this rendered object, but now see the grain again is not blurred. The grain is still kind of sharp and crunchy. So let's just kind of undo that, and we're back here to the bottom. So keep in mind that you need to add grain, but often it has to be blurred a little bit. In this case, the Gaussian blur is helping. Now, just to show you some of these options here, I'm going to close up the levels. There we go. And look here at the add grain. Notice there's a softness to it, right? It's that softness. And so with that softness, that's at 1, it's not really very soft. So if I uncheck the Gaussian blur, and we can see it again, you can actually take up the size and the softness of the grain. So if we weren't worried about blurring something or trying to do this separately, if I crank up that softness, see it does kind of soften it a little bit. Oops, that might be a bit too much. But you can take up the size and the softness and the intensity to try and match what you have here. But kind of keep that in mind that these are important values you can play around with, and that your grain can't look too sharp. It's got to match whatever happening here. Now, in speaking of matching, take a look at this as well under channel intensities for add grain. You also have intensities for each channel. And of course, these are the defaults that are just 1. What this means is you can add more grain per channel. Now, why would you want to do that? Let me come over here and let's kind of look at this amount here. Right here in After Effects, you have your channels. Of course, it's showing RGB at the moment. If I come down here and I choose red, there it shows me the red channel. And so, as you play along here, you can kind of see the amount of grain in that red channel. You see it there? Now, if I come over here and choose the green channel and play that, you can see that it looks a bit different. If I come down here and let's choose the blue channel and take a look at that, there we go. That's the grain in the blue channel. So what happens is, with your channels, green will tend to have the least amount of noise, and often blue has the most amount of noise. And that's just kind of the way that digital cameras are working here. So you can adjust the intensity and even the size, look at that, right, to try and match each channel. And that's kind of part of the trick. I'm going to go back here to red. Oh, actually, I meant red, green, blue. There we go. Okay, so they were looking again. So don't just add grain on it. Look at these other values and kind of fine-tune them as needed. Now, another tool for adding grain, and again, to try and do a better job, maybe not have you do all the work, let's go up here to Effect, and we have Noise and Grain, is something called Match Grain. Now, I'll just mention this here. The whole point of Match Grain is it gives you a region that you place over your existing footage, and it tries to analyze that grain and then put the same amount in whatever new object you're compositing in. So that's kind of a cool one right there to kind of keep in mind. But again, add grain, dust and scratches, match noise, maybe noise. These are some things here that are going to try and help you when you put in your composited elements to match the footage there. Okay, so let's take a look at a few more things here. I'm just going to come over here and say look at the shadow. Now let's turn the Gaussian blur back on so it looks a little better. We'll close up this layer, and then we have an adjustment layer. And the adjustment layer has a mask. There we go. If it didn't have that mask, then it would look, something like that. But this is a fine way to add a cast shadow to a layer is with the mask. Now, if you're clicking on the mask here, you can see that its vector color is red and the lines are outlined. If you want to be on that layer but not actually see your vector lines, there's this button right here which will toggle the visibility of the mask path. So I can kind of turn that on and off, which is really handy. Because with the mask lines on, I can't really see what's going on. As I turn off those vector path lines, I can see what's happening. So as I'm looking at this cast shadow here, obviously it needs a cast shadow. And of course the cast shadow we can see also has been parented to the null, so it's getting its tracking data. But you want to try and see if you can match what's already in the photo or the plate. In this case, we have right here, we've got a little item sitting here which is casting a shadow, this tiny little cube of chalk. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that these lines here look like they're really way too sharp. I'm sorry, just the opposite. They're way too fuzzy. Whatever you're looking at, you want to try and match what's already there, not just make it up. So let's come down here to our mask controls and see that a feather of 3 has been added. Well, just comparison by this little cast shadow here, I'm thinking that is too much. So let's just kind of take that down, and you see 0, that's that crisp, way too sharp edge. So what this shows you is that when you are doing masking in After Effects and combining it with footage, you almost always need some amount of feathering or blurring. We can see 0, which is not going to cut it. So I'm going to take it up just a little bit here. There's 1. Come here. Now let's do 1. There we go. Now it's a little bit better. And I'm also thinking that maybe that this levels adjustment is perhaps a bit too dark. So easily what I could do on this layer is just I could take the opacity down rather than getting into these adjustments here. I may have done a different type of adjustment for this, but if I just take the opacity of that layer down, then we might get it to be a little bit more of where it needs to be. Maybe 85% looks good. All right. So these are things you can always kind of fine tune and see how they work. So as I'm looking here at this mask, I'm also seeing that the shape doesn't really quite work for me. So I'll turn that back on and get my selection tool. Now, first of all, it's kind of stuck way out here, and it should, come and attach more. There we go, to the bottom of the can, right? Something kind of like that. But also, I'm noticing with the side of this pool table, you've got the wood and you've got the felt. There'd be a little bit of a change in angle here, which we're not seeing because this is all straight. So I think what I would do is I would come here and just put an extra little point here on this path, and then right here on that path. There we go. And then just kind of adjust it a bit so that we see a little bit of a change in angle. I'm going to kind of put that, it's kind of like there. So really trying to look at your source material, and anything you add, you're trying to see just as much as possible, how is that going to fit in there? What's going to make it really look like it fits into that scene? In this case, trying to have the cast shadow be a correct contour is really what we're looking for. So I think that might work a little bit better there. Of course, we want to try and match the angle of the other items as well. Again, what's really handy is that this chalk here has cast shadow, and so we can kind of look at that and try and get something that matches it up a little bit. And if I can say, you know what, maybe that's still not quite right, what if I take and reduce that shadow opacity a bit more? So in trying to look at that. Now, one other thing I notice here that hasn't happened yet in this little scene is, again, I'm looking at the real item. There's a bit of a reflection right there. Okay, and I see there's no reflection added right here. Well, I think we're going to need to have some semblance of a reflection, and that should be fairly easy to do. So if I come to this layer here, there's my composite element. I'm just going to do a Command D, and that'll duplicate that layer. Let's come down here to my duplicate on the bottom, and I'm going to want to flip it, sort of mirror it vertically. And the best way, or the easy way to do that in After Effects, is actually to scale. So let me hit S, and I can see that the scale is 17%. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to uncheck the constrain, and for vertical, it's 17. I'm going to put a minus 17. There we go. And that is how you flip it vertically. Zoom out a little bit. So now there it is, sort of flipped vertically, or mirrored, and I can kind of put it a bit like that. Of course, it has to go underneath the shadow, right? So let's move that underneath that shadow. There we go. That's a little bit better. Go here. And of course, it's not a great reflection because we need to see a bit more of the can there, the bottom of the can. But I'm just kind of cheating this a little bit just to add a little something, just a hint of something there. And of course, the big problem is it needs to reflect on the shiny wood and not on this felt. So the easy answer to that is make a mask. Let's grab our pen tool and then just really quickly define that area by going along where that wood is. And so there's the mask. Okay? And then, of course, as I mentioned, with pretty much any mask, let's turn off that, we would need to take, there's my mask there. Let's give that mask just a little bit of feather, 2 pixels there maybe. Okay, that's good. Now, of course, the big problem is the opacity is way off, right? So we could maybe change the opacity. There's my opacity setting. So it's going to be very, very faint. This is a very, very small amount of reflection. And of course, would also probably need some amount of blur. So I might just really quickly give this a bit of, where's my blur and sharpen? Just kind of go really quick down and dirty, give it some Gaussian blur, and just a tiny bit there to blur it. All right, so not the greatest thing in the world, but let's just turn that off. And you can see how just having a little bit there, really does kind of add some things. You also might want to look at perhaps blending modes. So if I say the mode here is normal, just for fun, I might try multiply. Multiply is going to darken. I think that's going to make it too dark, perhaps. I'll just maybe try something like overlay. The overlay could work because it gives me some dark and some light. That's a nice thing the overlay does. Remember, multiply is going to darken. Screen's going to brighten, and something like overlay and similar ones is going to give you both dark and light. That's kind of a nice thing right there. That's sort of working. I see some of the dark edge, and I see some lighter stuff right here. And it might just need perhaps now a little bit more blur. Oh, no, it already had a blur. I forgot about that. So let me just take that blur off and just give that one a bit more. I forgot I duplicated that layer. It's already going to have that blur on there. So there's the blur, kind of softening that edge a bit. And sometimes what works well with a shadow is to do a directional blur of like one direction or another. So let's kind of zoom out here a little bit. And what I'm hoping is this has actually made this a little bit better of a composite by adding that blur to the original item, blurring the noise, and then of course adjusting that drop shadow and adding a little bit of reflection there. So the idea really is to try and make this fit in as much as possible and look like it actually belongs there. So if there's something nearby that has similar characteristics, you want to look and see what this is doing to help you do the same thing to your composited element so they can look like they belong in the same space. And that's really the trick right there that you're going for. Just a couple other things I might think of. Notice how there's a really dark, kind of occluded shadow right there underneath the cube. So I might want to add some kind of little dark bit right there. And something else I noticed is that there's a pretty strong, it's out of the scene, but pretty strong light from above that's casting a bright highlight. You can see it here, you can see it on this paper. And I'm thinking maybe a little thing similar on this the top of the can here, just to make it look like it has some similar lighting characteristics to that. That might be a good idea as well. And these are things that you could even do with layer and layer styles. I've done a lot of this type of stuff in Photoshop, and so even an inner shadow that you turn it and make it bright could be a nice way to sort of add a little bit of lighting, a little top rim light right there. So these can be useful in some cases. So remember that they're available to you as well. But I think we've got some improvements here to the cast shadow and to the blurriness of the item. It might even need a little bit more blurriness. So the thing to do is to kind of look at it at various zoom levels and just kind of see what's working best. But the whole point is, make it look like it fits into the scene, look at real items in the scene, and then try and match what they're doing. And use these tools that I've mentioned. They'll be very helpful to you, and that's why they're there. The whole idea is to get a believable composite that really no one knows is a composite. That's the goal. That's the trick. Hope this helps, and see you next time.